and welcome to my channel. My name is Dr. Kate Boyd. I'm a pianist and a professor of piano. I created this channel to help you take your piano playing to the next level. In this video, I'm going to talk about how to play cantabile at the piano so that you can learn to play with a beautiful singing tone. This video is in response to a viewer question that I received a while ago. Cantabile is an expressive marking that you sometimes see printed in the score, and literally translated, it means singing or play with a singing tone. Sometimes you have music that doesn't actually literally have the word cantabile printed in it, but the cantabile expressive marking is implied by the style. For example, in many pieces by Chopin or in slow movements by Beethoven, a lot of times we want to play with a cantabile or a singing line. Sometimes you'll see other markings in the score that are similar in intent to cantabile, although they are not literally the exact same translation. Some examples of those would be cantando, ben cantato, even espressivo. These are not literal translations of the word cantabile or singing, but often they have similar intent or meaning depending on the context. Now, as pianists, we are faced with an interesting challenge when it comes to trying to play with a singing tone, because when you talk about singing, the implication, of course, is that it is actually possible to play with a continuous, sustained line like a singer. And of course, the piano is a percussion instrument. When you play a note on the piano, a hammer hits the string, and then the sound decays from the moment the hammer hits the string. There's no way to make the sound grow louder after you've struck the string. I play this, it only can get quieter. Therefore, to create a singing tone, to create the idea of a singing line, we have to create the illusion of a continuous singing line, since we are not able to actually physically crescendo from note to note the way that some other instruments can. For example, on a stringed instrument like the violin, it's possible to grow louder from one note to the next. Or if you're playing a wind instrument, you can increase the volume of a note from one note to the next by using your breath. And of course, singers can do that too. However, we pianists cannot. So how do we give that illusion? I'm going to share 5 techniques with you today to talk about how to give the illusion of a singing line on the piano. I'm going to be looking at 3 pieces when I demonstrate. I'm going to be looking at the beginning of the slow movement of Beethoven's Pathetique Sonata, Opus 13. I'm going to be looking at the second movement of Mozart's Sonata in C major, K330. And I'm going to be looking at the beginning of Chopin's Nocturne, Opus 55, number 1. I'm going to put a link to the first page of each of these scores in the description below this video, so you can just grab that and follow along. The first technique for playing cantabile that I want to share with you today is to play the melody significantly louder than the accompaniment. Let's have a look at Beethoven's Sonata Opus 13, the Pathetique Sonata, and we're going to look at his second movement, which is marked Adagio Cantabile. And what he's saying here is he wants the melody sung out above the other 2 voices. We have a 3-voice texture. We have a bass line in the bottom, and that isn't supposed to be sung out. We have a middle voice here, and that needs to be gentle and accompanimental. And then we have the solo voice on the top, which is to be sung. And if you've ever heard a singer sing with accompaniment, we know that the accompanist plays quieter than the singer. And that is exactly what we want to replicate here. It can be helpful in this movement to think of a string trio texture where the top line is a violin, and the middle line is a viola, and the bottom line is a cello. So here's how the beginning goes. And one big difference between playing on a piano versus playing with a string trio is that we don't have 3 different instrumental timbres to play with. We are playing all 3 voices on the piano, and that's why it's important to play the melodic line significantly louder than the accompanying voices. And it can often be surprising to students to realize how much louder it really needs to be in order to project above. I will show you what it sounds like without projecting out the top voice. I'm going to play all 3 voices equally. So I'm putting equal pressure on all 3 voices, and you can hear the melody isn't projecting, it's not coming out. And so we need the top voice to be played with more firmness in the fingertips, more of a kind of pointed feeling on that part of the hand. And that voice is being played with fingers 4, 3, and 5. 4, 3, 5. And so we need to feel the weight of the hand kind of tilting to that outside part of the hand. And then the inside of the hand, which is played by 2 and 1, which are actually stronger fingers, but we want them to play more quietly, has to be much more on the surface of the keys. And so the difference between those two needs to be quite significant. And that can be very frustrating for people to practice if they're not used to it. And so a technique that I recommend to practice and learn how to voice 2 voices in one hand is to play it in 2 hands to get the exact balance that you want. So now I'm playing the middle voice in the left hand and the top voice in the right hand, and I'm really singing out. And I can experiment with how that sounds, right? And get it exactly the way I want. So if it's 2, that's too much in the lower voice, right? So I want to get that so I can really control it in the 2 hands, and then I go and imitate that. And then meanwhile, the lower voice is supporting us with the harmonic motion of the line. So in fact, the hierarchy of voices is going to be the top voice is the most important and it has to be sung out. The middle voice, or the second most important voice, is going to be the bass line because it supports with the harmonies. And then the middle voice is going to be just whispering in the texture. The second technique I want to show you how to play cantabile is to play the melodic line very, very connected and smooth. A lot of people don't realize on the piano that to play a line connected, it's not like you just lift one note and then put the next one down, because that's not smooth. Actually, what you have to do, because the piano is a percussion instrument and because our action is like basically hammers swinging and hitting the string, which are controlled by the levers, which are the keys, is that you want to have the notes, you need to have the notes slightly overlapping. And what that means is as one note comes up, the next note has to be going down. So it's like this kind of legato motion. I did make a whole video all about playing legato. I will put a card to that right up there. I'll also put it in the description. So you don't have to leave this video to go watch it. I'll put it in the description so you can check it out at your leisure. But the idea is that you don't want to just play and then go up and down like that, because that's not really truly legato. That sounds more articulate. Legato would be more smooth and connected, overlapping. You have to practice overlapping. So I'm going to show you what I mean by that in the Chopin Nocturne, Opus 55, number 1. And so we have this melodic line, starts on C, and I don't want to just go to F and pop up my thumb like this. That sounds a little bit detached. I mean, it's not detached, but it doesn't really sound as smooth as it could. Cantabile means sung, and I want it to sound beautifully sung. When you listen to a singer, the voice, the air just goes from one note to the next. And so I want to hear da, ya, da, da, da. In order to do that, I have to overlap the fingers slightly. So as the F goes down, okay, so the way to gain sensitivity and the ability to do that is to sensitize yourself not just to the attack of the note, but also to how you release the note. If you can feel the key underneath your finger, almost pushing your finger up underneath it as you release. The analogy that helps me when I think about this is to think about like being in an elevator. And so the key is an elevator. It's going from the ground floor down to the basement and then back up to the ground floor. And I'm standing on the elevator the whole time. I'm standing on the floor of this elevator. I'm not jumping up when it goes from the basement to the first floor. I'm not like popping off of it. I have to always keep my feet on the floor of the elevator and let the elevator ride up and down between the floors. I'm going to demonstrate this touch using the beginning of this Chopin Nocturne, Opus 55, number 1. always projecting the melody. I'm playing it significantly louder than the accompaniment, and I'm playing super, super legato, which in practice feels like I'm slightly overlapping all of the notes. Let's have a quick look at the second movement of Mozart's Sonata K330. I'm looking at measure 8. I'm going to play very, very legato, and I'm going to project the line above the accompanying voices. So to get that touch, I actually feel more weight in the outside of my hand, and I also feel my fingers digging in more so that they can overlap. The fingers of the melodic line. The fingers that are playing the chords are playing much more shallowly. I'm feeling looseness in those fingers. I'm feeling looseness in that part of the palm of my hand. Something I want to point out to you with the Mozart is that I talk about playing legato. However, we do have articulation markings that you need to notice. So we have 2 note slurs here. So these 2 notes are very legato, overlapping, but I definitely do not want to hear, because we have 2 note slurs. And then lean on that. Lean on this. Always overlapping when you are connecting the melodic line. The third technique I want to share with you about how to play cantabile or with a singing tone is to listen to how each note decays and then match the next note to the decay of the previous note. And what I mean by that is that at the piano, as I said before, we cannot grow a note. We cannot actually play a note and then make it actually sound louder, because we are playing with a hammer, it hits the strings, then the sound decays. And so if all you do is just hammer, 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 all the notes are just going to sound like they have a little bit of an attack on it. Like, that's not ugly. That's not like a horrible sound and it doesn't sound harsh. It sounds normal. But you can hear a clear attack on every note. Attack, attack, attack. You can hear that. So to get around that and to create a sound that sounds more singing, because as you know, a singer does not sing everything with a strong consonant on the beginning of every syllable. They're able to sing and connect with their breath, and we want to get that illusion on the piano. So what you have to do is play the note and then listen to the note as it decays. You can hear it continues. And it's good. It's basically starting up here with a strong attack and then boom. And too often with the piano, we pianists listen to ourselves play the note, and then we think about playing the next note, and we're not actually listening to the note after we play it, because physically it's possible to do that. I can play this, and then I can like call a friend or whatever, but the note is still sounding. I don't have to attend to the note to make it continue sounding. All I have to do is keep my finger down. And so we need to counteract that tendency by actively listening to the note for the duration of the actual length of the note. And that means tuning in to how the note decays and the shape of that decay. Then what you do is you match the note. After that, you start to try to match the attack of the next note to the place where the previous note decayed to. It actually sounds harder than it is, because it's more about attuning yourself to how the note sounds after you play it. And once you start doing that, you start to intuitively be able to match the notes. Let me show you using the beginning of this Chopin Nocturne we've been talking about today. And first, the thing I'm going to do is not match the attacks. I'm going to play it with just each note kind of like, I'm still going to sing out the melody. I'm still going to play legato with overlapping fingers, but I'm not going to listen to the decay of the note and match the attack. So this is what it sounds like. Do you hear how the notes sound more the same? I'm not playing all the notes the same, but it does sound like each one has its own attack. So what I need to do is I need to listen to this note, and then when I play the F, I have to listen, Obviously, I'm not going to play like that because even though it decays a lot, I can't literally match it, but I can tailor it, I can dovetail it. And you have to listen depending on what piano you're playing on as well. It'll be different if I play my piano in my studio at the university versus here. I have a 9-foot piano in that room, and this is a Steinway Model L, so it has a different kind of resonance. And then if I want to grow, then I have to do the opposite. I have to kind of imagine a crescendo through those notes. If I never imagine the sound getting louder, then it'll only get quieter, because if I'm matching the note to the decay always, then it's just getting quieter and quieter. And so when you're making a note softer than the previous note, listen to the decay and then match. And then if you want to grow, imagine a crescendo within those notes. Grow to there. I want to go to the downbeat there. I'm going to demonstrate. Match here, match this F, and then grow through to the C. One physical component of doing this that's really important and I think often overlooked is that you can't really do this, this matching very effectively if your entire arm and wrist are locked. It's harder to do if you're just using fingers like that. So I'm a proponent, as you know, if you've been watching this channel for any length of time, of having a loose, flexible wrist and using your arm and wrist to help position your fingers into place to play. And so here we can actually use the arm and wrist to kind of create that longer line. I'm playing the C, and then I'm doing a slight wrist circle to the F, and then I'm using my arm to connect all of these notes as I go down. And then here I'm making this motion. So you have this feeling of looseness and freedom in the arm, and it's supporting what your ear is telling you about the decay of the notes. And again, I'm going to play this phrase because it's so pretty and I'm enjoying it. And now going all the way through the phrase to there. If you like this video, you might be interested in my free weekly newsletter where I share practice tips, some of my favorite recordings and resources, and behind the scenes stuff from my life as a pianist and university professor. You can subscribe to the newsletter by clicking on the link in the description below this video. The fourth technique I want to share with you about how to play cantabile, or with a singing tone, is to listen carefully for a consistent tone throughout the melodic line. And what that means is you don't want notes to just suddenly pop out and sound super accented, and you also don't want notes to drop below a certain threshold in the singing line. Playing the piano with a consistent tone requires a lot of self-awareness. We need to be constantly monitoring the sound that we're creating and responding to that, and then allowing our physical technique to support what our ear wants to do. Let's go back to that Beethoven example we were looking at before. I want all the notes to have a kind of consistent tone within each band that we talked about before. When I say band, I mean a range of sound. We have the melody, right? And so within that band, I want to make sure that the tone never drops below a certain threshold. So, like, that's kind of too quiet. So I have to be always within that certain range. And so it can be helpful to think, okay, that's that band for this melody line. And then the bass is supporting. And so I don't want the bass to like get really anemic. Like, I don't want to be, you know, so I want the bass to be in this band in the texture. And so I want to have a nice sound there and tone and shaped. And then the middle line, I want to also have its own band of sound. So meaning I don't want it to suddenly be like all just so quiet that I can't discern what the notes are, basically. So I need to hear the range, but everybody has their own place in the cumulative sound that they are inhabiting. I'm going to play it once where I randomly emphasize notes in the melody. So this is what that would sound like. Here, and I was doing it really intentionally. Most of the time when that happens, it's accidental. And so you need to have this consistent tone in your own ear that you are listening for in the melodic line. And so there are two things you can do to help yourself learn to play with a more consistent tone. The first thing you can do is sing along. I can't tell you how helpful it is as a pianist to sing while you practice. So here I am. And what that does is it helps me feel the air in my own voice and the smoothness of that. And then it helps me kind of intuitively try to match that with a consistent tone. The second thing you can do to practice a consistent tone is to practice the individual pieces of the texture on their own and work on that, thinking of it like I was saying before about, like, for example, a string quartet. Well, how would a violist play this line if that's all they had? They certainly wouldn't just play all the notes the same, and they wouldn't randomly accent some notes. They would play it with great care and musicality. And so if you bring out and work on each individual line, that can help, or each individual piece of the texture. It's especially helpful in a kind of song without words texture, or even the texture that we were just doing in the Beethoven, where you can play the top line, you can play the middle line, you can play the bottom line, and separate them all, then bring them back together. Or even play pairs, play the top and the bottom, like that. Play the top and the middle in two hands or in one hand, play the middle and the bottom. For sound, tone, consistency, phrasing, shaping, and listening to the tone. The fifth technique that I want to share with you today about how to learn to play with a cantabile or singing tone is to record yourself and then listen back to that recording. That's one of the fastest ways to make progress. In my opinion, I estimate that it's in a ratio of 4-to-1 in terms of the efficiency that you will gain in your practice. If you record yourself and listen back, you can save about 4 times that amount of practice time, provided that you actually listen with your full attention and give yourself useful feedback that you can apply when you practice. Recording yourself and listening back will help you bridge that gap between what you hear at the instrument and what is actually coming out of the instrument. I've had a lot of people ask me about the mechanics of recording yourself and listening back, and I just want to tell you, keep it simple. When I record myself and listen back, I just use my phone. I stick my phone on the end of the piano, and then I play something, and then I will listen back to it, usually with headphones because the sound quality is a little bit better. And I follow along in my music, and I take notes about things that I want to practice or work on. And I also take note of things that I think went a little better than I expected, or it sounded different than I thought. To use the tool of recording yourself and playing back effectively and helping yourself learn to play more cantabile and with a singing tone, you're going to want to imagine how you want it to sound in your head first and sing it out loud like we were talking about earlier in this video, and then record yourself playing it. Then listen back and compare what you are hearing on the recording to what you imagine in your head. And then when you're actually playing the instrument, when you're practicing, you're going to try to narrow that gap. Remember how it sounded, remember how it sounds in your head, and as you play, focus on approaching that mental ideal you have that you're imagining consistently. And keep repeating this cycle of playing, recording, listening, imagining, playing, recording, listening, imagining, until that gap starts to narrow over time. It's not something that's just going to happen after one practice session. It's something that you learn over time. And of course, another thing that'll help you is to listen to professional recordings of pianists playing cantabile and with singing lines. Listen to Rubinstein playing Chopin. Listen to Alicia de la Rocha playing Mozart. Listen for professional pianists playing with a beautiful singing tone, and that will start to implant an ideal in your ears and musical imagination about what the piano is actually capable of. And you'll start to listen to yourself differently and listen for a tone that is sustained and singing across multiple notes. Remember that when you're playing cantabile at the piano, you want to approach the piano with looseness and freedom in your wrist, arm, and elbow. Avoid locking or tightening from your wrist and elbow and shoulder, because that'll force your fingers to isolate and play individually, and it makes it very hard to create any kind of sustained line. So we want looseness, freedom in your shoulder, arm, and wrist in order to group multiple notes together and create a singing tone, like we were doing earlier in the Chopin, where you play this and you come around and you group notes. Cantabile playing is an elusive and essential component of playing the piano. It's something that's kind of hard to put your finger on, but you know it when you hear it. And it is a skill that you can develop. You can start to develop that self-awareness and the ability to really listen to your own sound in order to improve your own ability to play cantabile. Playing cantabile with a singing tone is one component of playing expressively. For a deeper dive on expressive playing at the piano, check out that video right up there. Please don't forget to like this video, share it with other people if you found it useful, and subscribe to my channel. This helps me reach more people. Thanks so much for watching. Good luck with your cantabile playing. I'll see you in the next video, and happy practicing.